You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Today's Conveyancer podcast. I'm delighted today to welcome along Joe Pepper, CEO of tmgroup, and Natalie Moore, founder of Aconveyancing. Today we're going to be talking about a report that you guys are going to be publishing in January, but we've got a first look at what potentially the report is going to be telling us about the state of the conveyancing industry. So thank you very much indeed to you both for joining the podcast. Joe, I'm going to come to you first. This as yet untitled report follows on from some previous ones you've done, Thriving in a Pandemic and The New Normal. Why have you done the report again? Why now? What's the objective?
Thanks, David. I think the feedback that we got from those two reports, and we've done reports in the past as well, was really positive. We started off this particular type of report by carrying out surveys in the original COVID pandemic. Because we felt that was the best way of getting the information. And we found that we got a huge take up from conveyancers and other property professionals in providing their opinions. And the data that we got was very, very rich. We're getting around about 850 or so responses to these. It's up each time we do it. We get slightly more, of which 600 or so are conveyancers. So that's a very significant statistical number. If you consider the number of conveyancers. And so it really does help us take the temperature of the market. And we found that the reports have been well received and, people see a lot in them. And it's been such a tumultuous period of time over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, from the lows of the initial pandemic to the highs of the stamp duty holiday process to now the economic challenges that we're in at the moment. It certainly hasn't felt stale. There's absolutely a different challenge facing the industry every time that we look at it. So it's been a really positive experience for us, and it's been a really well received report when we finally publish it.
I said that the full report's going to be out in January, but you've just started to look at the results. What are the first impressions? What are the key themes that are coming out of this particular survey?
Yeah, so we closed it last week. It was running open for a month or two, I think, certainly about 6 weeks. And we've looked at a very high level in the last few days. What is coming across incredibly strongly is uncertainty, and the uncertainty with regards to the market and what's going to happen in the short term, but also uncertainty in terms of what that means for the long term of the industry. And most particularly, it's around people.
That feels very different from the previous report, The New Normal, where, from memory, collaboration and technology was a real focus.
Yeah, I mean, collaboration technology is still high up on people's agendas. When you look at the future, the second item in terms of the what people expect to see coming down the track is around technology and the calls for collaboration. But at this moment, it's become submerged quite a long. It's a second place, but quite a long way down the pipe from the concerns over the economy and the concerns over people. And of course, conveyancing has always been a very people intensive. And people have been very important to the process of conveyancing. And I think that's what's causing people the most concern at the moment.
We're delighted to welcome Managing Partner of the Year at the recent Modern Law Conveyancing Awards to the podcast, Natalie Moore. Thank you, Natalie. I know you contributed to the report as well, but is that something that you're seeing in your own business? Are you seeing that staff, people, well-being is such an important part of what's happening in this industry at the moment?
I think it's been an important thing for a while, not just now. Certainly sort of post-pandemic, it's been a real a real focus that firms have needed to address. So much has changed since the pandemic. We talk about uncertainty. We've never known uncertainty like we saw it at the first lockdown in March when the housing market shut. We're 2 years on from that, and we got through that. Obviously, where we are today, there's so much uncertainty in terms of the economy. There's a lot of media hype and negativity. But people as a whole, people are still trying to work out what's important for them as individuals, and everybody's very different. So I think it's great that, there's a report like this done and it goes out to so many people that are willing to participate, so that we've got that data and we can analyse that and see, what people are feeling. And then it's down to the owners to really set objectives internally to address those concerns within the practice.
Uncertainty can be very unsettling for staff. And Joe, I know that one of the bits of feedback you've already established in the report is that actually there's a lot of people looking at leaving the conveyancing industry in the next 1 to 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the scarier aspects of the report. I think it's something like something over a third of staff expect to leave the industry in the next 5 years.
That's an astonishing stat.
And it's not just because they're of a certain age and they're going to retire, because we're able to split that out across the various segments and discover that actually it's people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. They're all thinking this, and a significant proportion of those are thinking about leaving in the next 12 months as well. So there is a rush for the door, or a feeling that that's potentially going to happen. And obviously uncertainty potentially drives that as well. But when we look into, what are people's concerns with regards to people, pay and remuneration is a massive issue for people. And I guess in the wider context of the market, that's not particularly surprising, but 63% of our respondents felt that pay and remuneration was insufficient and was very unlikely to change to a point where it's sufficient anytime soon. So that is a huge number, to be honest, in any survey, 63%. But there, there was more than that as well. Working hours, the ability to or the requirement to work very, very long hours. Almost 50% of people felt needed to change. They felt there needed to be more respect between the professions. We've heard that before, but again, that was very high up. We've talked a lot about well-being and what maybe the industry has done to address that well-being, but there's absolutely a feeling coming through here that more needs to be done. So there needs to be more focus on employee well-being and improving the property transaction. All of those things were cited by well over a third of respondents as things that needed to change. And also over a third, 36% of respondents were already seeing staff retention issues and an inability to recruit. And there's just this overriding concern that people are leaving the industry, even those that are saying they're not going to leave the industry, that people are going to leave the industry and there isn't the conveyor belt of new talent coming into the industry to replace.
Dare I say, with my tongue in my cheek, if you asked anybody whether they were paid enough, then they might answer that they're not. But this is really connected to fees, is it not, Natalie? Fees simply aren't high enough to enable conveyancers to pay a decent, a good wage for the work that gets done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to hear all those stats come out, and hearing those, I'm nodding my head. I can agree with a lot of those, and we see those dailies. Going back to remuneration, I think it's the remuneration for what's expected of a conveyancer to do that is ill-balanced, and the hours that are worked. So yeah, it does go back to fees and what employers can afford to pay people based on the profit that they're making. And when there's a shortage of work and people are reducing fees to get the work and fighting to get the work in, it's the conveyancers that have the knock-on effect of getting that work progressed and over the line and working around the clock and meeting those clients' expectations, which isn't easy. we very much look at the client's journey or, getting the work in for the firm, but more needs to be addressed to the employees' well-being and their journey if they're going to, retain their employers or stay in this industry. And it's scary to hear those facts. We lost a lot of conveyancers back in the 2008 recession, and it's took a long time to, re-recruit, retrain people. And then to hear that, potentially a third of those people are looking to exit is really quite worrying. And, it takes time to train people up. We've opened an academy this year at Aconveyancing to, try and attract some new talent, and we can only attract them and train them with experienced conveyancers for them to learn from. So, you lose the good people and the industry is just going to create more uncertainty, longer timescales, because you're not going to have the expertise to get those transactions over the line. So, yeah, ultimately it comes down to fees.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there, Natalie. I think the other thing to consider as well, though, is productivity. Because if we can improve the level of productivity and make it easier for people to do their job fundamentally, and increase fees and get fees back to a level that they should be at, then that will give the industry an awful lot more of an ability to meet employee expectations. It's very difficult at the moment. People are looking for pay settlements, in the public sector at the moment, which, run into double figures. And we know that that's hugely challenging, in order to be able to manage it. And particularly if you're coming from a not very strong starting point. It's going to be a challenge, and I think it's interesting that you referenced the washout that happened after 2008, and I kind of reflect on the impact that had on house builders. We in terms of the number of house builders that pretty much had to shut their doors, and I think there will be a concern that we don't know how long this economic malaise might last, but there will be a lot of firms that are looking at their costs. And if they can't do anything on productivity and they can't do anything on fees, they're going to struggle to stay in business.
And this is a vicious circle, isn't it? Because we're coming into a scenario where hopefully we won't have to give conveyancers 100, 120, 150 cases. We might be able to manage that workload slightly better, which is what the report identifies as the industry needing. We've ramped up recruitment over the last 2 years to cope with the volumes. That's had a knock-on effect on the outgoings for conveyancers in terms of staff costs. There's a balance here, isn't there? Trying to reduce workloads for conveyancers, having more conveyancers doing the job, which is great, but if we can't afford for that to happen, either through increasing productivity or increasing fees, as you say, Joe, this is just going to turn into a real commercial nightmare for conveyancers.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
And Joe, you said that collaboration and technology are further down the list in terms of priorities for respondents, but they're still there. It's still an issue for the industry.
Well, no, absolutely. And obviously within what needs to change for people, actually improving the property transaction I referenced earlier was one of them, and collaboration was a key part of that. And when people were looking at the future, as I said, I think it's something like over half were, felt that the biggest impact on them was the economy and the uncertainty associated to the economy. The second, way down the list, but still firmly in second, was technology. And then you were into, which was kind of sort of 14-15%, something like that. And then you were into a kind of myriad of other items that were kind of sort of 4 or 5%. So, technology, whilst in second place, was still 3 times the size of third place, if that makes sense. So from a collaboration point of view, people are still very keen on doing things and working more closely with people. On the technology side of things, I think there's an appetite not to reinvent the wheel, not to input massive new case management systems or do anything like that, but to look at pieces of technology which they can very easily just pick up and integrate into their current processes, which can help them improve what they're doing. Obviously, digital signatures gets a lot of mentions, and consumer portals, and so on and so forth. Things which can be very quickly plugged into what they already have are the things that people want to focus on. So it was both of those, I think, do tie into the people agenda, because they were talking about how do we make the work more productive, as I say, more efficient, and how do we do it to make the work easier, so that it can relieve the pressure on people and improve their work-life balance.
Given the uncertainty created by the economic situation and clearly identified in the initial findings, Joe, what do conveyancers, in your view, and Natalie as well, what do conveyancers need to be thinking about over the next 12, 18, 24 months in terms of managing their business? How are you looking at this, Natalie, and thinking to yourself, okay, what needs to change in my business in order for me to adapt to these changing circumstances?
Each year there's a different challenge, whether it's pandemic or stamp duty, and I think the uncertainty this year is going to be the real challenge. Not knowing how much work's going to be available next year, not knowing whether firms can afford to keep their full employee base. We've already seen firms making redundancies, so it's a really uncertain, worrying time for people. And these are people that have worked relentlessly for years and year on year for other people, for their clients, for their firms. So to think that they're now going into another year of challenges that could affect them as individuals and affect their families, it's a really worrying time. So I think owners have a duty of care to the employees, and hence why people has come up top on that survey, to really set some clear objectives as to, what's their survival next year. Should it come to that, we're only going on sort of the media hype, and yes, the economy is in crisis. The whole country knows that. It's not just affecting this industry, but certainly for me as an owner of a business, I'll be, we've already started looking at the business as a whole, where we can restructure. If there is a shortage of work, can we put people into different positions in the business? It's not just a law firm anymore, it's a business. We need to look at, onboarding, marketing, networking. These are all things that are going to help firms, stay afloat, so that, that the clients know who they are. Why should clients use this firm? And that's where firms collectively have got to come together, work together, to highlight their reviews, highlight the talent that they've got working for them, and, really focus on their people, because they're going to need their people to onboard them to help get this message out over the next year. So, conveyancers, you've got to prove that you're not just a conveyancer anymore. You can bring positive change to the industry. You can help sell your firm's services, and whether that's through good service and reviews, or getting out there and trying to drum up business themselves, or that's how times are changing.
If you knew that this was a downturn that was going to last 3 or 6 or 9 months even, you would factor that into your business planning. The problem is we don't know if it's a 3, a 6 or 9 months, or if it's a year or 2 years. We don't know what's going on. I think that's the biggest challenge, because law firms and conveyancing practices are not historically very scalable. The way that they've scaled historically is to hire and to fire. I mean, that's because it's a very people orientated, people do the work. And I think that's going to be the big challenge, because people will be making those decisions. You're absolutely right, Natalie, that we've all seen the news flashes about, big conveyancing groups, going through redundancy programs at the moment. And I think that is the thing that's going to be the biggest challenge. If law firms can embrace the idea of scalability, embrace the idea that they need to be productive and scalable, then I think that will probably be the template for the law firms that come out of this period in the best health.
So I was at a conference recently, and the regulators are advising firms to start stress testing their business for a 10%, 20%, 30% downturn. So the immediate reaction is, well, firms will just start making redundancies, but actually we're not there yet. So ahead of that, look at what operation efficiencies can be made, performance reviews, obtain that data and start analysing it ahead of it, look at, what additional revenue streams there are in the business. We've got a wills and probate department, can we start cross-selling those services more? The last thing that I want to do in my business is to start making redundancies, because people have been a big key part of the growth of the business, and have been part of that journey. So, it's doing everything that we can do collectively to avoid that. And this is worst case scenario. I'm sure we'll be sitting here in another 12 months and there'll be another report, and it'll be, a different concern within the industry, like it's been year on year. But I think, if there is going to be a downturn, if there is going to be a big decrease in work, then, firms can use that time to create those new operation efficiencies, to look at collaborating more with local agents. If we're going to increase fees, the only way we can do that is to convince agents and clients that we're worth paying that bit more for, because ultimately, your clients are going to go into your agents, they're going to get comparison quotes, and they're not going to know the value of the service if they're being encouraged to use this firm, or they've never been through the house moving process before, or cost of living's tight enough as it is. So it's really using that time as effectively as possible. And I've been in this industry probably 20 years now, and there's never been a quiet moment. So I'd be surprised if it goes that downhill, that we're sat there with nothing to do.
Just on this economic piece, in preparation for this podcast, we've been chatting about your own experiences of the current economic climate. And Joe and Natalie, both of you have sort of identified that you've seen reductions in volumes and reductions in inquiries, perhaps slightly earlier than you might normally have experienced them. Is that that's the case for you, Joe? Certainly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we've seen volumes tail off in the last few weeks, far earlier than we would normally expect to see them tail off, and significantly down on where we would have hoped they would be by the end of this year. But also, even when we were doing our reforecasting, only 3 or 4 months ago, we weren't anticipating that they'd be down this level. And there, as Natalie says, there are some doomsday numbers out there. We've all seen the Savills report talking about 28%, and Zoopla put a report out this week talking about 20% down. And obviously mortgage approvals in October, I think, were down 10% on September, which is unusual at this sort of time of year. So as Natalie said, it's really difficult to understand whether or not this is going to be something that's going to maybe take a quarter or two to wash out of the system, or whether this is part of something slightly longer term and slightly more concerning, which I think, we always assume in this industry that there's a flaw, don't we? That we got deaths and divorces and events and other changes which impact on the overall number. And one of those things is people moving for work. And it may be that flaw slightly lower than we think it is, because the people moving for work argument is probably slightly less valid now because of the ability for more people to work remotely. I don't know. We're absolutely experiencing a downturn at TM, at least, and that goes across all of our different brands, CDS, PSS, and so on.
What about yourself, Natalie? Are you seeing a similar dip in volume?
We have seen a dip in volume. This is the time of year that we generally do see a dip. And if we look back at pre-pandemic levels, we're not too far off that. We've had a phenomenal couple of years where, numbers have escalated. So, I'm remaining positive as best as I can. I can't say I'm not nervous, or, there are sort of those underlying fears, but until we go into the new year and see what that brings. 2 years ago, we went into a pandemic. A lot of people purchased that are coming up to renewal of 2-year fixed rates. That's going to create some movement in the market. The work will be there. It's, going out there and fighting for it or grabbing it, but being respectful and being kind at the same time to work together and look after your people.
And it's interesting you say that. That's a real pet subject of mine, is succession planning and thinking about people, because Joe, one of the stats that has come out of the report is the number of firms that simply are not increasing their focus on succession planning.
Yeah, no, we've seen, I think it's less than 20% of firms have increased their focus on succession planning. So 80% of firms aren't looking at this at all, which when you consider that we're expecting to have a large number of people leave the industry, because that's what they're saying to us, you would have thought would be higher up on the agenda of a lot of firms. And I suppose that's just the overriding concern, isn't it? That people aren't necessarily seeing what's coming. And this survey, which is, this is 600 people, so it's not the entire industry, but you've got to assume 600 is very representative of the industry, saying, I'm a conveyancer, get me out of here.
But before we go all doom and gloom, this presents an opportunity, doesn't it? We've identified that it's going to shake loose panel relationships or estate agent relationships. We've identified that there's going to be greater opportunity for collaboration. What other opportunities is whether you call it a downturn or a normalization, what else is that going to present for conveyancers, do you think, Natalie?
Well, there's a lot of technology that's come to the market over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and firms have been so busy, or the technology's still been working on getting it right. It's not quite there. So I think that's an opportunity next year that, firms can take time out to, look at what's available, or, look at cost savings across their business, what they might be overpaying on, or just reviewing the business as a whole, or just general housekeeping on files that conveyancers just don't get a chance to do. That's so important. CPD training, talk about succession and career planning. There's a lot of conveyancers out there that aren't qualified yet, that want to get qualified, that are even signed up for calls, but just don't have time to undertake the learning material that's involved. So, it's all that groundwork that can be done pending the market getting back to some form of normality.
I always kind of say necessity is the mother of invention. And we are certainly in a period now where I think, people are going to be looking at their business and saying, I've got to change something. I've got to do something. And I think that there is an opportunity to look at the processes that exist within a firm and trying to understand, what could we be doing better? How could I be saving my staff time? How can I be taking away some of those irritating admin things that they kind of have to do that ties them up in effectively non-productive work? And whether that be, through adoption of, digital signatures, which you can just basically go and buy into that. It's not a problem at all. Or, mentioned earlier, consumer portals, which are also very easy to adopt within businesses. It can be anything like that. What fits into the process of your business that you can just kind of sort of plug and play? Are you integrated with your various search providers? I mean, I always bang the drum, I know I've done this before, for saying to law firms, your suppliers work for you. Make sure that you make those suppliers do what you want them to do for you and for your people, because, we bang our heads all the time with people who, other providers in the industry who say, oh no, well, we're not, or it's evident that they don't have the appetite to, for example, integrate something on behalf of a mutual customer. And you kind of sit there and think, well, okay, you're the customer needs to be the person who's driving this other organization. We can't drive that other organization. So make sure that your supplier is doing what you want them to do. Integration is hugely important to my mind in saving people time. So, make sure that when you're selecting your suppliers, you're choosing those that will do what you want them to do and integrate with others.
And what about yourself, Natalie? Have you got a message for the industry that kind of comes out of some of the research that TM have done?
The research just shows, again, what a tough industry it is to work in. You've got a third of people saying they want to leave. Some don't have the option to leave. And if we're going through a recession, there might not be jobs available to switch to. A lot of people over the years have wanted to exit the industry, myself included, but we find ourselves still here and fighting on. I think the real challenge is, as conveyancers, more than anyone, want change. We don't want to be working, large caseloads for low fees. And, it's very difficult to stand brave in times like this. We've worked hard to increase our fees and be selective of the type of work that we do. Now, the first sign of uncertainty, it's mass panic and firms cutting and reducing the fees, despite, a year of Be Kind campaign and work together and stand together and, we're worth more. So, that's my real concern next year, that, there'll be a real price slash. Myself included, we've always stood by, we won't reduce our fees. We're reluctant to do panel work. Going into the next year, you're literally as a company having to review everything. If there's the option of, do we make redundancies or do we turn on panel work, you can stand brave all you like, but which one are you going to do? And then we're back in that vicious cycle, a year later when the market picks up and we're answerable to suppliers. And, like Joe says, we should be dictating to the suppliers and being brave and not being fearful of stating our worth. But unfortunately, it's a difficult industry that's not appreciated or recognised for the work that the conveyancers do.
Stay brave, Natalie. That's my contribution. Stay brave.
I think it's a case of coming out fighting, isn't it? It's about, as you said, identifying marketing opportunities, new business opportunities. There is going to be a fight for work out there. Work has come to conveyancers' doors over the last couple of years, and it's much more over the next 12 months going to be about trying to win business, demonstrating your value to clients, and yet absolutely increasing fees.
Think long term, I think would be my advice. Think about, what is this industry, what should it look like? What does a successful industry look like in 2 years' time? What does a successful firm look like in 2 years' time? And how can you transition into that model if that's what you need to do? And I would be looking at that, not necessarily looking at the next 3 to 6 months, because it's going to be what it's going to be. You're not going to have the time to make any changes in that period.
Don't focus on the doom and gloom, glass half full, not half empty. Conveyancers do their jobs very, very well. And one of the biggest thrills of the job is providing that service for clients and giving that call on the day that they can collect their keys and knowing that they've got somewhere that they wouldn't have got without you. So remember what we're doing it for, despite the pay not recognising the job and things like that, the job satisfaction that we do get out of it, and that is why we are still in it.
We could probably talk about this for much of the rest of the day. We have run out of time, but I have to say it's been a thoroughly enjoyable discussion. And Joe, the report in full will be available sometime in January.
Intention, absolutely. And we haven't got a title for it yet. We're still working on that. We're still working on the on the content, but we should be hoping to publish this, if not the first week in January, the second week.
Coming Out Fighting seems to be quite a good title.
Coming Out Fight, that, yeah, okay. Do you want a commission on that?
Be brave, don't bolt.
Thank you very much indeed to the both of you for joining the Today's Conveyancer podcast. It's available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todaysconveyancer.co.uk. My thanks to Joe and Natalie. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.